I've been a fan of the Pokemon franchise for pretty much my whole life. I started by watching the anime when I was about 2 or 3 years old. Then at 7, I got my first game with Pokemon Emerald. In fact, I still have my original childhood copy to this day. After Emerald, I've played every mainline game since. I think most of them are great because each of them has their own unique or interesting thing about them. But there are a couple that probably could have been a lot better. I'm looking at you two specifically. So what I'll be doing is talking about these games and then rank them on a tier list. I'll be dividing this into 3 videos to cover each of the generations of the franchise. Part 1 will be the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. Part 2 will be the DS and 3DS games. And finally, Part 3 will be the Switch games. Before we start, be sure to check out my channel to see the other videos in this series. And consider subscribing so that you can be notified when videos like this or other videos go up. If you enjoy the video, leave it a like as it helps the channel get seen by others. And finally, let me know down below what you guys think about my tier list. Do you agree with it, or would you place certain games in a different tier? Let's go ahead and jump right into it. This video will be part 2 of 3, the DS era. So let's get it started with some Gen 4 stuff now. So Diamond and Pearl are the first games that I ever got that in which I got both games. So Emerald, as I mentioned in the last video, Emerald was the first game that I ever got. But ever since Diamond and Pearl, I began the tradition of buying both games in the paired set. And it continues to be a thing to this day, and I will always buy both versions of the game going forward. So Diamond and Pearl were the first times that I ever bought both games, and I played through both games. However, I did put more time into Pearl because I had an action replay and I just went ham with doing stuff to the game that I ended up putting close to 300 hours on my original playthrough. And I think I even had a shiny unknown, but for whatever reason, I lost it. I don't know if maybe I just forgot to trade it away into a different game and I deleted the save file. I think it was the letter R was the unknown. And I think it was the first time that I ever figured out what a shiny Pokemon was, because all I remember was when that unknown appeared on screen, I was like, oh, it's blue. It's different. I should probably catch this. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to catch it. I didn't know what shiny Pokemon were, but something told me that it was something that I needed to catch and to value and cherish. And then at some point I lost it somehow and it'll be gone forever. And it has been gone forever. They bring some improvements to the franchise, such as the physical special split. I think that that's something that is very important to the competitive scene because it made it so that way Pokemon that were probably not great because of their stats and their moves in Gens 1 through 3 now are a lot better because of that distinction between what is considered a special move and what is considered a physical move. So for those that don't know, in Gens 1 through 3, whether an attack did physical damage or special damage was determined based on the type of the attack itself. However, despite good things like that, these games do suffer from being very sluggish. They're very slow paced. I mean, we came from a generation that was 60 FPS all the way through to then going to what felt like 10 FPS. But really it was 30 FPS. But there were some things that made the game super slow. Like, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the meme of a Heracross using close combat on a Blissey and then that health bar just taking 35 seconds to drain because it would go down 1 HP per second at 30 frames per second. So things like that. Surfing was also very slow. Traversing through the region was just slow in general in every aspect. That enough, I think, is something that would have me put the games in B tier because while I think that they're solid games and the story is very interesting, I think the gameplay is what really drops it to the B tier. If it wasn't for that, I feel like they would belong in A tier for sure, but it suffers too much from being slow games that I think middle of the road is where it belongs. And then this is the same thing for Pearl. Put that up there. But then we have Pokemon Platinum. So Pokemon Platinum is this generation's enhanced version. And while there are some improvements to the speed of certain things, it's really only the surfing that they improved on. Things like battling still feel a little slow. It has been a while since I've played it, so I can't remember exactly if that was improved, if the draining of the health bar is a little bit faster or not, or if it's still the same 30 FPS that you get with Diamond and Pearl. But I feel like it's not that significant of an improvement to put it into A tier. I think this is the definitive way to play through Sinnoh. I just don't think it's good enough to be an A tier, but it's definitely better than it's definitely better than what Diamond and Pearl are. So I think I'm going to put Platinum right here above those. Now, I still think that Diamond and Pearl are better games than Gold, Silver, and Crystal. I think because they're just modern and they're a little bit better to play for the experience. You have to have like a certain amount of patience to play these older games from Gen 1 and Gen 2. So because they're more modern and because they're a little bit more fast paced by comparison, I'm putting them above Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Next up, we have some of the best remakes that have ever been made. I think by far the best remakes, but they still have their issues. But Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver are games that I think a lot of people in the Pokemon community will argue and say that these are the best games ever made. And while I can agree to most of the arguments that are being made, I still feel like this game suffers from one huge problem that was even present in the original games of Gold and Silver, and that is the horrid level curve. At a certain point in the game, it's very hard to level up and be on par with certain boss fights, by the time that you get very close to the end of the game, or at least like the very end of the gym challenge, because once you get around like the 5th, 6th, and 7th gym badge, it's very hard to level up your team enough so that by the time that you get to the 8th gym with Claire, you're severely underleveled and you have to go through a lot of unnecessary grinding in order to be able to defeat her. What I find weird is that when you get to Blackthorn City, like Claire's Pokemon are like in the upper 30s or 40s, I want to say. But the issue is that in the routes near Blackthorn City, they're full of Pokemon, wild Pokemon that are in the level mid 20s. And to me, that makes no sense. Like if I'm at the 8th gym badge, the wild Pokemon in the adjacent areas should be at least in the low 30s, not mid 20s. But when you're going from Morty's gym, which is I think the last place in which the level curving is pretty well done, and you start to head over to Cianwood, or you make your way, through some of the other cities and whatnot to get to Cianwood, there aren't a lot of strong trainers that you would gain enough experience to gain, let's say, 5 levels between all your team members by the time that you get to Cianwood. And then from there, fight, I think Jasmine is her name, the steel type gym. And then when you even go to her, you don't even battle the 2 gym trainers that are inside that gym because they say, oh, thank you for helping me out. For that, you don't have to fight us. Go ahead and take her on your own. Say, well, let me fight you because I want to get experience. That to me, that I think that was a weird story choice to say like, hey, we're gym trainers, but we're gonna be the only gym in the entire franchise, literally the entire franchise, the only gym trainers in which you don't battle, and it makes no sense. But again, just like horrible level curving in that whole section of the game, and it really makes the games difficult to play. But I will say that other attention to detail things do make the games feel like a great experience. I still think though these games are better than most of these, so I'm gonna put them up at the top of A tier because overall, despite that horrible level curve, they're still damn good games. I will give them that. And then moving on from Gen 4 to Gen 5, again, some banger Pokemon games that a lot of people slept on originally because of some of the controversies with, oh, you can only use the new Pokemon, I want to use old Pokemon. I mean, the games were a soft reboot to the franchise in a way, kind of going back to with what Kanto was like, where in Red, Blue, and Yellow, you only had that generation's Pokemon. I mean, it was the only generation that existed. But also with Fire Red and Leaf Green, where you couldn't use any Pokemon outside of the original 150 until you beat the story. And you get into the post game, and then you can go out and catch Johto Pokemon. You can trade Hoenn Pokemon from Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Things like that, right? So this was the first game, or the first set of games since Fire Red and Leaf Green, really, where you were locked to using only the new Pokemon, or using the Pokemon of that region, before then having access to newer Pokemon in the post game. So Black and White are games that I was sort of in that same camp of, or in the same bandwagon, I guess, where I didn't like the games because of the same reasons that people were complaining about. And it took me a couple of years to warm up to the games, to the point where I realized, hey, you know what? These games are not that bad. In fact, these games are great. In fact, I would argue and say that these are some of the best Pokemon games ever made, up there with Emerald and Heart Gold and Soul Silver. One cool thing that these games introduced that I really liked is the constant animated sprites of Pokemon. So before, Pokemon would come out on screen, they would do like a little animation at the beginning, and then there would be a static pixel art. But with with Black and White, they had them fully animated. So throughout the whole battle, they're animated. The only time that animation I think would be static is if the Pokemon were frozen. But if the Pokemon were asleep or paralyzed, the animation would slow down a little bit. And if they were paralyzed, burned, or poisoned, then the hue of the Pokemon would be yellow, orange, or purple respectively, depending on that status condition. Like little details like that, it was really cool. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention too with Gen 3, I didn't mention this last video, but Gen 3, it wasn't until Pokemon Emerald that the Pokemon Company reintroduced animated sprites upon encounter, because I did mention that in Crystal they did that. You know, when a Pokemon popped up on screen, it would have a little animation and then it would go static. Well, Ruby and Sapphire got rid of that when they came out. Fire Red and Leaf Green also did not include animated sprites, and then it wasn't until Emerald that they reintroduced that feature. So it was absent for like 5 years until Emerald came out. It made no sense, and then it became a mainstay for then all of Gen 4, and then now Gen 5 you have the evolution of that, which is the constant animation. Aside from that, I think the Unova region is a really cool region, really intricately made. So many things to explore and encounter and discover about the region. And I think the story is very unique in its way. Team Plasma, I think, is by far one of the more interesting teams that we've had in the games up until this point, and probably ever, because I think from here it kind of goes downhill. I mean, these games are incredible. And I hate that I was part of the group of people that felt like these games were not that good. So I think that they deserve to be at the very top of A tier, right above Heart Gold and Soul Silver, because they're just that good. Honestly, some of the best games ever made. And I think a lot of people can agree that these games were far, far better than was originally perceived. Pokemon were cooking. And they continue to cook because Black 2 and White 2 came out a year later, and I mean, I'm just gonna put them in S tier. They belong in S tier. They're such great games. If you thought Black and White were good, Black 2 and White 2, better. How can they be better, you ask? Don't ask me, because I have no idea. They just were better. Pokemon Company, they cooked and they made a 3 Michelin star recipe with Black 2 and White 2. It's hard to place them with Emerald version. I still think that Emerald is better because it did have the Battle Frontier having this very unique battle facility. Now, Black 2 and White 2 did have the Pokemon tournament, I think, Pokemon World Tournament or whatever it's called, where you can battle gym leaders and Elite Four members from all the games up till that point. And I thought that was really cool. It's really cool in that way, but what kind of holds that post-game feature back is that it's just one facility and it's a tournament thing, and I don't think there's much incentive to play. With Emerald version, the incentive was when you battle through the facility, you earn the frontier symbol. You get a silver one for the first time, and then when you play through again and do pretty much double the work that you did to get the silver one, you get the gold one. And I think I've only ever gotten, I didn't mention this in the last video, but I've only ever gotten one frontier symbol, and it was a silver one from I think it was the Battle Pike, the Survivor one. But that's a side thing that I just wanted to mention, which is why I think Emerald is still better, because the post-game stuff is just better in Emerald. The Black 2 and White 2 are still fantastic games. If you were very skeptical about Black and White or Black 2 and White 2, I highly recommend that you play those games ASAP, because they are criminally underappreciated and criminally underrated. So please go ahead and check them out. I think some of the best experiences with a Pokemon game that you'll ever have, by far. So now we're gonna jump from 2D to 3D. Pokemon X and Y, controversial for their own reasons, came out 2 years after the 3DS, and it was the first time that at least the main series games jumped from 2D to 3D, because there were a couple of games that came out prior, but then this was the first main series game to be fully in 3D. Now, what I might say could be very, very controversial. With the release of Pokemon ZA, I've been playing a lot through X and Y recently, doing some shiny hunting for the Pokemon that can Mega Evolve. I think that these games, X and Y, just like with Black 2 and White 2, just like with Black and White, are maybe not criminally underrated, but definitely very underrated, to the point where I feel like people give these games way too much hate for being easy, for being simple, Team Flare sucks, etc. While I do agree on some of those, like I do think the games are easy, I do think that Team Flare sucks. I think that Gen 6 overall, you know, between X and Y and ORAS, these games are probably some of the best that have ever been made too. Like, they're up there with great games. They introduced some, I think one of the biggest things was that they introduced a few more shiny hunting methods, like with chain fishing. They brought back radar hunting. They improved the shiny odds from 1 in 8192 to 1 in 4096. And despite what you might say about the 3D models, I think they kind of look great. As much as people love the pixel art from the old games, I feel like the 3D models look great as they are too. I will say though that yeah, the games are very easy. They're very simple stories, but I think those are minor things. Like, these are kids games, people. These are kids games. We're not gonna expect something to the level of like The Last of Us or God of War levels of storytelling, right? This is a franchise made for literal 10-year-olds. So of course the story is gonna be simple. Of course the games are gonna be easy. Should Pokemon introduce a difficulty mode? Sure. Let us choose between easy, medium, and hard. But we're not gonna get that. That's the thing. Or at least if we do, it won't be for a while. Because these are kids games. But now we're getting into nostalgic territory with these games because they came out 12 years ago. It'll be 12 years by like November, I think. And Legends ZA comes out right before, it's like a few weeks before the 12-year anniversary for these games. And one thing that I really liked about, or it's actually two things that I really liked about these games that I give them a lot of praise for, is that the region is huge. Kalos is pretty big for a 3DS game, believe it or not. And there's so much to do too. And then you have the Pokédex. So this was the first, and so far the only Pokemon game in which the initial regional Pokédex has the most amount of Pokemon that you can obtain within these games. So I believe that there are like 455, give or take, Pokemon that can be registered between the central, coastal, and mountain Pokédexes in the game. So each one has a minimum of 150, and then some have like bonus ones that are sort of hidden, that don't show up until you actually have the Pokemon. So I think it's like at least 456 Pokemon. When you look at Sun and Moon, they have like 300 Pokemon plus like the hidden ones, like, you know, mythicals and whatnot. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon had 400 plus like a couple of the mythical Pokemon that are hidden until you have them obtained. And then Sword and Shield had 400 for the vanilla decks. Yes, you do have 2 regional Pokédexes with the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra, but those are paid DLC. If you don't buy the DLC, then your regional Pokédex is just the Galar Dex. So you can't necessarily keep track using a Pokédex of the Pokemon that you own or that you've seen. That you have to pay for in order to do that. Or unless, I could be wrong, because I do have the DLC, but I don't know if for someone that doesn't have the DLC, do you still get the Pokédexes for those areas, for those DLC, or is that still locked behind the paywall of buying the DLC? I have no idea. If you have a better idea, let me know down below, because I would like to know. I would like to be able to know the answer to that question, because you can still, you know, transfer Pokemon from home or trade from someone that have Pokemon that were brought into the game. I'm not too sure. Let me know down below. I would love to know, and then I'll respond to anyone that does let me know. So this game, I think that there's a lot of good going for it that outweigh all of the not so good stuff, like the easy difficulty and the simple story and things like that. I think this game belongs in A tier, and I'm gonna put it here in between Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Fire Red and Leaf Green. Actually, no, I'm gonna put it here above Heart Gold and Soul Silver, because I think I would prefer to play X and Y over Heart Gold and Soul Silver, especially because since Heart Gold and Soul Silver have that horrible level curving, that's already going to be like I'm only going to play the game if I really need to. Whereas X and Y, I can delete my save file and play the game again, and I wouldn't have a problem playing through it, because I feel like the natural progression of leveling up and things like that is much better in X and Y than they are in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. So at least that's how I'm going to rank it, you know, in this tier. And then Pokemon Y will also go there with it. Also, with the addition of Mega Evolution, which I forgot to mention, I just remembered now, arguably the best gimmick that Pokemon have introduced thus far, and I love that they're coming back, and I love that we're gonna get new Megas. As of recording, the Pokemon Presents from July dropped only a few hours ago. We got Mega Dragonite, which is pretty cool. Design is a little weird. I can kind of see what they're going for with trying to make it look like Dragonair, but I like that we are getting new Megas. I mean, I think that was inevitable, but I'm excited to see what other new Megas they'll be introducing when this game gets close to release, and by the time it does release. All the other gimmicks have been kind of like, they've been alright, but not to the level of Mega Evolution. So them introducing that feature also elevates these games to be where it is versus where it could have been, probably lower up in this tier. But speaking of Mega Evolution, we're jumping into the counterparts, sort of, to this generation with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. We get new Mega Evolutions, like 20 new Mega Evolutions, which is really cool. We get the ability to catch Deoxys in-game during an in-game story event, which is really cool. Not a stupid mythical or mystery gift event. They are much better games than the original Ruby and Sapphire. I will say though that because of the lack of Battle Frontier or just any like the good battle facility. They won't be like S tier. As much as I love Hoenn, I feel like because of the lack of emerald things, like emerald aspects to the game, or improvements and enhancements that were made in Emerald, that these games don't deserve to be up here or even at the beginning of A tier. I think that they are amazing games. I just think that they're not as amazing as they could have been if they would have just added a few more things to the post game, such as the Battle Frontier. So weird that I'm putting them below Black and White, but I think that's very fitting. And they did introduce a new hunting method with Dex Nav, so that's cool. I mean, you do get chain fishing. You don't get the radar chaining anymore because the Poke Radar is just not in the game. But you do still have some of the same training hunting methods that were introduced in X and Y that carried over into this game. In addition to that, you have then the Dex Nav, which is really cool. But yeah, really great games, great improvements. I can't say it's the definitive way because technically Emerald had more content with the Battle Frontier. So Emerald is still the definitive way, but Oraz is a close second. We'll say that. It's a close second. Now, moving on from Gen 6 to Gen 7, or at least half or 2/3 of Gen 7, we have the Sun and Moon games. So Pokemon Sun and Moon are games in which I am not really that much of a fan of because I feel like they're just riddled with too many slow parts, cutscenes and things like that. They're slow for different, for different reasons. Not slow like how Gen 1 and Gen 2 were, or like how Diamond and Pearl were slow. These games are slow in that it takes forever just to be able to do things because there are so many cutscenes for like story stuff, and it slows the progression down a lot, and you'll find yourself in these moments of dialogue for like 2 to 3 minutes at least, sometimes going even longer, and sometimes it feels like it never ends. To the point where I feel like every time I've played through these games, it probably took me over 40 hours just to beat the main story. And I played casually, 40 plus hours to get through the game. That is not something that I want in a Pokemon game. It shouldn't take me more than 20 hours to get through a Pokemon game. Like if it takes me just above 20 hours, like I think my first playthrough of Sword and Shield, I might have put in like 24 hours casually. But if it takes me more than that, I feel like that I don't want to play because these games shouldn't take that long. I feel like it's gonna go somewhere here in B tier, probably even at the bottom of C tier. Like I would rather play through Gold and Silver than play through Sun and Moon in some cases. I feel like it maybe it belongs here in between Diamond, Pearl, and Crystal. I think yeah, probably. Yeah, I think they belong there. I'm not gonna delve too much into the other things about this game. Like they're basically just like a continuation of Gen 6, 3D models. But there is a lack of 3D in these games. Apparently there is one instance in which 3D actually works for something, but it's a very specific thing that I can't remember what it was, and I'm not gonna bother looking it up. But these games feel like a step back from what we got with Gen 6. I'm not that much of a fan. Like they're okay games overall. The story is kind of interesting, but gameplay wise, I feel like these games take a pretty significant step back from what we got in the previous generation, that it deserves to be much lower than that, to the point where I guess I do prefer to play these. I prefer to play Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum over Sun and Moon. And that's saying a lot. And I'm not gonna, for the next ones, I'm not going to talk about them too much. I mean, yeah, the games introduce, Z crystals and things like that, but I feel like it's not a worthy enough gimmick to talk about and have any good things to say because frankly, I've never used a Z move ever. It's actually my least favorite gimmick. So I won't get too much into Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I do think that they are an improvement for sure. They added some post-game stuff that makes them better, I'll give them that, but they still are very much vanilla Sun and Moon. It's just a slightly different story and a little bit of post-game stuff that the original Sun and Moon did not have. But I would still rather play Diamond and Pearl over Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I do like that in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon they do have the wormhole post-game thing where you can get whatever legendary Pokemon they coded into the game, as well as getting non-legendary Pokemon that have greater shiny odds depending on how far you travel into the wormhole. But it's not enough to say that, oh yeah, these games are definitely better. I prefer these over everything else in B tier and maybe half of A tier. No, they definitely belong in B tier still. Above Sun and Moon, these are definitely the definitive way to play through Alola, but they're not great. Yeah, I would still pick these over the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, but I don't know, man. They could have done so much to make the games just a little bit better. Maybe reduce the amount of cutscenes, but it's just, man, it drags out for so long. And that'll do it for now for part 2. Part 3 will be out soon. But if it already is, I'll put it here on screen for you to click on. Aside from that, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys, well, right here. Go ahead and click.